We'll go over the agenda for today here. We have some upcoming events we're going to preview with you. We've got a great slate of things that are already happening for SEMA in January, February, and March. So we're excited to show those to you. And we'll have a word from our sponsor today. So we're excited to have Dubai Business Events sponsoring this event. And then our main presentation with Tracy Bury. And then we'll hold time a little bit for questions and answers. This is a very interactive session today, so we are excited to have you to be a part of it all. Our next slide here, we'll go to our upcoming events. We have a couple of study tours that are on the slate and are ready to register for you. So for those people that are looking to go to HIMSS 25, we will be there March 3rd through the 4th, actually, March 3rd through the 4th in Las Vegas. We're excited to have Opus and Caesars Entertainment sponsor this event for us, as well as Informa, showing us behind the scenes at HIMSS. Please make sure that you go out to semaonline.com today and register for that. And then in April, we will be in Anaheim with Atlassian. This is a wonderful event. We did a behind the scenes with Atlassian in 2023. It was a great study tour. This is sure to be another wonderful study tour. So if you're available, please go and apply at, again, semaonline.com at upcoming events. As far as other connects, these digital series that we have a great one that will happen on February 5th, Navigating the Shift from Corporate to Freelance, with Erica Brunke, Stacy Kashuback, Tracy Judge, and Michelle Snyder. This was a great session that happened at Summit last year, and we're excited to bring them back to bring this content to you. I think you will really, really like it. So please make sure you're going out and registering for that today. As well as a favorite that is always a great keynote at Summit when you have him here speak. Some of you might have heard him speak at Convening Leaders in Houston a couple of weeks ago. Michael Dominguez will be with us on March 13th to give us some ideas of the trends and macro analysis that are taking place over the events industry in 2025. He is always very insightful. Please make sure that you're signing up to be a part of that. And then on March 27th, we will have our first town hall. The SEMA town hall will take place at 9 a.m. PST, 12 noon. We will be going over the events that took place in Q1, a little outlook for things that are coming in 2025. And then we're going to be kicking off SEMA Summit. SEMA Summit will be January 27th through the 29th this year in Austin, Texas. You can sign up for Save the Date right now, but we'll be kicking it off on this town hall. So please make sure you join us to get all the information about Summit that is coming up. All right, let's go to the next. This next part is for all of my industry partners out there. If you do not know already, we have created a SEMA Partner Program. We have looked for ways that can get you in front of our event marketers 12 months out of the year. And we have an engagement level, an impact level, and a visionary level. If you want to know more about this program, please email me, brian@semaonline.com, and I'll set up some time to go through the partner program with you. We have got some great partners that are signing on. We'll welcome Streamline Events to our partner program. They are our first signed off partner program, and we'll be looking for many more to join us. All right. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Stephanie Chung. Stephanie has been a great supporter of SEMA, and Dubai Business Events have always been a great partner. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Brian, for the warm welcome. Pleasure to see some familiar faces here. And for those who don't already know a little bit about Dubai, it is really timely for us to present around cultural navigating events in a truly global setting. we are a city in which 90% of people who live in Dubai are not from Dubai. So you have over 200 nationalities living in true harmony. English is actually the primary language spoken as a result of this diversity. So we are excited that this particular topic with Tracy today is going to highlight some of the key skills that you'll need to operate your future events in Dubai. I'll leave you with this. It's the only city in the world where you can be standing having a cocktail at the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa, drive 30 minutes and be on a beach, drive 1 hour and be in the middle of the desert. So, from a perspective of incentive programs to corporate events, there is something for everyone. And over half of Fortune 500 companies has a regional headquarter office in Dubai as well. So without further ado, I'll kick it off to Tracy and Brian for the rest of our agenda for today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We sure appreciate it. Hopefully we can get to Dubai and do a behind the scenes in Dubai. That would be amazing. So thank you so much for your support. We'll have more from you. Welcome, Tracy. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Brian. I'm really delighted to be here and also to see Stephanie again, because it's a while since we were in the US last year.
You know, this topic is so relevant, cultural complexity and global events. We have all of, I think all of our members are doing some type of event globally. Tracy, tell me a little bit about your background and how you got started in events.
It always makes me laugh actually when I get asked this question, because it's very much a non-traditional pathway. I'm actually a physical therapist by background, and I started and I was working clinically in the UK, and then I went to work for a national association, and I was driving forwards research and development and evidence-based practice. And then in 2002, I went to work for the International Association, so that's World Physiotherapy. And I was brought on board in the first instance, really to help drive up the quality in the International Congress scientific programs. So I came in very much from the professions centric side of things. And actually I was a presenter there in the past. And then gradually, as I got more and more immersed and had more time to give to the organization, by the time I left, which was in 2023, I was actually the deputy CEO and had overall responsibility for all aspects of the Congress, from negotiating staff, suppliers, strategy, legacy. So as I say, very much a non-traditional pathway.
Wonderful. Well, I know you have an interactive session for us today, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take us through this, and then we'll come back at the end and ask for any questions.
That's great, thank you. So just before I start showing the slides, what I would say to everybody is, if you've got pen and paper or your phone and notes, we're going to be doing an interactive quiz, and I always think it's quite useful, a bit of fun, self-reflection to keep your answers, and then you can also have a personal score at the end. So I'll just get going with sharing screen. And we'll get going. So before I actually dive into some of the many components of cultural complexity when it comes to global events, I want to take a moment to reflect. And this, I think, is particularly relevant when we're thinking about DEI, because it all depends on the shoes you're standing in or the seat that you're sitting on. And maybe through this session, you might feel slightly uncomfortable, because I'm going to challenge you to think about it from your own personal perspective, as well as a global one. So I know DEI is very topical, and I have to say, over the pond here in the UK, what's happening in the US is certainly on the news a lot. But I think many of you would recognize, when we're talking about this, some really common factors that are talked about. And in many organizations, they make us think both as employers, employees, but also when we're planning our global events. So gender, sexuality, race, ability, age, ethnicity are probably the most common dimensions of DEI that get talked about. They're the most common ones to be measured and reported on. Some people ask them when they're planning events. Some people feel they can't ask it because what's a legitimate question to ask, which is an interesting one if we're thinking around the context in which we're planning. So what I'm going to show you next is something called the Wheel of Power and Privilege. And this recognizes that the world is far more complex. Now, this is data that's been derived from studies in the US. So this is a US-centric wheel, and it would be slightly different if we did it in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, but very relevant to the audience that I'm here with today. It talks about a variety of things, including education. It talks about neurodiversity, body size, wealth, language, as well as some of those other dimensions. And the further you get from the center of that circle, the less power and privilege you have. Why is that relevant to you? Because it impacts many of you in perhaps career pathways, but actually when you're thinking about your audience in a global environment, that where you come from may be very different from where your audience is coming from. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the term implicit bias. So implicit bias is our brain's attempt to be efficient. It's a mental shortcut and it feeds our gut reactions. These are the thoughts that are created from our past experiences, our culture, our parents and environment, religion, the media, the things that are all around us. They influence the way we think about things, our preferences for or against. And that's part of that definition of bias. That can also translate into the association and events world and the traditions and processes that have been established over time. And implicit bias is a problem because often it means it's unconscious. And when we are challenged, we often go looking for information to confirm those biases. So if we're going to open up to much more cultural diversity globally, we have to be really intentional. So we have to challenge ourselves to pause, to be thoughtful, to be reflective, as I said, to be intentional, and sometimes even to be calculating in the way we approach things. So having set the scene, what we're actually going to do now is an interactive quiz. We're going to use data that comes from a wide range of sources to really challenge us to think about that information and what it might mean for us if we're organizing events globally. There's going to be 12 questions. You'll have less than 30 seconds to answer each one, and we're going to take them one by one. So I will pose a question and then we're going to do a live poll. So get ready to submit your answer. We'll share your responses and then we'll look at that in the context of the research and evidence and talk through what that means. As we go through that, if you've got a burning question or a comment you want to make, please use the Q&A and chat. We want to make this interactive and respond to the things that this makes you think about. So on that note, we're going to get going with the first question. So which nationality does not like using humor in meetings? Spain, Germany, Australia, or the USA? So if you can now vote, that's on screen. And Michaela, if you think there are enough answers in, we can close the poll and show the results. Can we close the poll, Michaela, and have the results come up? Michaela, all I'm seeing is a tick on screen for one answer. Sorry, Brian, is it showing on your side that we're getting a poll come up to show the results?
No, I'm just getting the one question. Kim Gerber says she sees the correct answer. They see the correct answer.
Yeah, I believe they can see it. I can see it as well.
Okay, but but what I was hoping was we were going to see the results of how everybody had voted, a bar chart. Is that not coming up?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't see that, right? Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
16 people answered Germany and 2
Yep.
people answered Spain.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so those that answered Germany, yes, you're correct. And so why does this matter? So if you're going into negotiating situations, you're going into meetings, humor can work very much for us if we're used to it, but not in all settings. In business meetings, I would say in Europe, it's relatively frequent, more so in some of the North European countries. But Germany, it definitely isn't. Humor is for the bar and a beer afterwards. The other country where humor really is not appropriate and is frowned upon is Japan. And Japan is actually where I'm working with a client on an international congress in May this year. Sometimes they can laugh and it might be that they're humoring you, but you need to take things and adjust your own working style to be culturally sensitive to the one that you're working in. So that, I think, is really important. How you're used to working in meetings doesn't necessarily translate in another setting. So let's move on to the next question. In which country are 50% of the politicians women? Japan, United Arab Emirates, UK, and Rwanda. And we'll just give that a few more seconds. And then Michaela, if you can shut it when you think we've got enough answers.
There we go. 1 person answered Japan, 2 people answered UAE, 7 answered UK, and 8 answered Rwanda.
Okay, so a surprising statistic here for you all. The answer is the UAE. And why do I use this statistic? I think it's really important about, excuse me, public perceptions. As Stephanie knows, World Physiotherapy, the organization I was working with, was actually in Dubai in 2023. One of the challenges we often have as a global organization when we go to new destinations is dealing with preconceived ideas and assumptions that are made by others in our audience base. So the statistics here are really interesting. So in the US, it's 24% that are women politicians. It's 32% in the UK. It's only 10% in Japan, but actually in Rwanda, it's 64%. Although Sweden is the country that naturally has the highest number because they don't have a gender quota, whereas Rwanda has been very intentional, as has United Arab Emirates. And globally, it's around 20%. So there's still a long way to go. Now, whilst that might not have a direct impact for you when you're planning events, it does have an impact on how your audience might perceive destination choices because of the biases that they have and the beliefs that they hold. So you may have to be working with that. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about communicating and negotiating globally. And on the screen, you have a pattern that describes communicating and negotiating with starting a little bit of small talk, casually introduces business, a proposal, resistance, generally keeps calm. You might get a bit of deadlock and humor, and then you go through to a decision at the next meeting. But which country do you think that reflects? Belgium, South Africa, Canada, or the UK? So if we can just bring up that poll. Thank you. And again, Michaela, if you're happy to close it when you see enough, and then we'll look at the results.
Four people chose Belgium, 3 people chose South Africa, 7 people chose Canada, and 4 people chose the UK.
Great. So, and the answer is it's the UK. And I certainly recognize this, as did the audience when I did this with a workshop in UK last year. But what I want to do is to show you some really contrasting styles of communication and negotiating. So on this slide, don't worry too much because I know it'll be hard to read some of the smaller print, but there is Sweden, the USA, the Netherlands, and India, all with different patterns from the one I just showed you, but also very contrasting. I think Sweden is a really interesting one, because who would say that Sweden is that different from myself in the UK or for you in the US or Canada? But it's very much around how they set the context at the beginning, sort of semi-informal, but at the same time, there's then a lot of discussion and consensus developing, more discussion. And I love the way that this one ends. Swedish way is best. So it doesn't matter what you're going to do, everybody's going to try and persuade you to end up there. Stephanie will recall this quiz that I did with a group in the US in Washington last year, when I then showed this US flow of communication. All the cards on the table, spell it out, get louder, confront, provoke, use sarcasm, kidding, a bit of a fight, but then towards concession and clarity. You may recognize that, you may not. Netherlands, again, a very different approach, and India has its own way as well. So the other thing to highlight here is this communicating pattern research obviously tries, like any research, to come down to norms. So within any culture, you will have variation, but there is research behind it. And this actually comes from a book called When Cultures Collide, which I've borrowed as the title for this quiz. It's a very thick, heavy book, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily heavy reading. And you can dip in and out of it. So if you are, for example, going into a particular country like the Netherlands, Sweden, or India, you can do your homework. You can really take a deep dive to understand more about the environment you're planning your global events in. So this is a really interesting one when you're thinking about trying to attract international audiences to your events. So I'm a delegate. I can visit 42 countries without getting a visa, or I get a visa on arrival. But where do I live? Where's my home? Uganda, Pakistan, Mexico, or Taiwan. So I can get into 42 countries without a visa, or I get one when I arrive. Uganda, Pakistan, Mexico, or Taiwan. And again, Michaela, I'll leave it to you to launch the results when you're ready.
Two people chose Uganda, 1 person chose Pakistan, 5 people chose Mexico, and 9 people chose Taiwan.
Okay, this is a really interesting one. So the answer, it's Pakistan. Pakistan has only 9 visa-free countries plus 33 on arrival. So of the other ones that I showed you, Uganda has 35 visa-free countries and 35 on arrival, so 70 in total. Mexico has 97 visa-free and 49 on arrival countries. Taiwan actually has 75 visa-free and 51 on arrival. So let's take that example of Pakistan and contrast that with the passport that I hold and the one that you hold. So my UK passport and your US passport can get us into over 150 countries without getting a visa or getting a visa on arrival. The world isn't equal when it comes to travel. So if you're holding your events in the US, for example, but you're wanting to pull in an international audience, visas is a huge barrier to participation. It's also a group where visa refusal is the highest. And these will be people who live in parts of the world where there isn't necessarily an embassy, or they're right in the middle of the city. In a country like Nigeria, sometimes people have to even take an internal flight to go and get their visa, and all the costs associated with that. And there is a website where you can go and check the visa and passport mobility and the privileges that we have. It's also interesting that, having held events in Switzerland, where we've got the home of the World Health Organization, for example, and many international NGOs, it was the area where we had a conference probably with the highest number of refusals. And that contrasts with the UAE, where we actually had the lowest number. And it's one of the reasons why holding events in that part of the world opened up accessibility for communities that we were working with in Africa and Asia that were frequently denied access to quality education. So I think this is a really interesting one when you're thinking about where to host events. And in actual fact, in the UK, it's been reported that some of the universities who have collaborations with universities in Africa, they have to actually hold their meetings in the Gulf region because that's where their colleagues can get visas, whereas they can't necessarily guarantee that to bring them to the UK. So we talked a bit about communicating and negotiating. This time it's about listening. And in the center here, you've got a pie chart. So just read around that. The biggest area you'll see there is courteous, smiling, listens, never interrupts. Content less important than speakers' manners, and they read between the lines. So is this from Japan, Sweden, Germany, or Oman? Thanks, Michaela. So the poll's up on screen. And Michaela, when you're ready.
Twelve people chose Japan, 2 people chose Sweden, 1 person chose Germany, and 2 people chose Oman.
Great. So actually, a great response here in terms of recognizing this one. And I think Japan does have quite a unique culture and way of communicating. And this certainly reflects my personal experience. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you 6 very different pie charts. So we have France, listening for information, that biggest area. Japan that I showed you. Spain, similarities with France, but probably thinking of other things, watching the person, waiting for an imaginative phrase, I think is really interesting here. Whereas France is looking for a bit of flair to engage them. In the Arab communities, a little bit more absorbed facts, could well be defensive and likes to be flattered. UK, I certainly recognize this, listens politely, smiles, nods, occasionally interrupts for clarification. And again, this one I know brought a laugh when we did this before, Stephanie, was listens in snatches in the US and wanting to be entertained, give me facts and figures, you know, get to the bottom line. So if that's your natural listening behavior and you're in a global business environment, it's worthwhile, again, doing your homework, because this can avoid points becoming contentious because the language may be seen as rude or offensive, and just trying to use different language that will engage with different habits and approaches. So all about the nuance in communication and your own self-awareness. So which country is most culturally diverse? And I think what I need to do here is perhaps just give a definition around culture. So culture refers to the shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts, things that characterize a group or society. It can include things like language, diversity, cultural heritage sites, artistic and literary achievements, and tourism. So it can be really diverse in its own right, culture. So I think it's important to set that scene here. So which is the most culturally diverse? The answers are up there on the screen: Canada, South Africa, Uganda, and the Netherlands. Thanks, Michaela, when you're ready.
Ten people chose Canada. 4 people chose South Africa. Nobody chose Uganda. And 2 people chose the Netherlands.
You see, this is where I feel as if I need a drum roll now. So here comes the answer. It's Uganda. So African countries often rank highly in studies of cultural diversity thanks to their many tribal groups and languages. So that's why I gave you that definition at the beginning, because it's around how we view culture changes our perspective on the world. And it's actually sort of said that in Ugandan places, literally 5 people away from you every single time will be somebody from a different culture, a different tribe. And the statistics are really quite stark. So this is on a range of the measures that I mentioned. So Uganda is 93%, so 100% would be just as much diversity as you can possibly imagine. And that contrasts highly with Canada at 71. So it's still relatively high because a lot of immigrant populations, but actually much more to do with indigenous populations and the recognition that's now come from that. South Africa, similar, but the Netherlands really contrasting. And I think this is interesting in Europe, where people think there is a lot of internal migration and migration from Africa. And it comes back to how we think about culture and the respect we have for those roots, and how people themselves feel about it. So another one around communication, because I think this is really important in everything that we do. In which of these countries is good communication most likely to be low context? And what I mean by that is it's precise, it's simple, clear messages accepted at face value. What is said is what is meant. So Italy, Argentina, China, and the USA are your options this time. Thanks, Michaela, when you're ready.
Two people chose Italy. 1 person chose Argentina. 7 people chose China. And 4 people chose the USA.
Okay, really interesting contrast there between China and the USA in the responses. So the answer is actually the USA. You don't need to explain things. Things are accepted as face value. And what that means is you're not having to read through the lines as much. And I'm going to show you now the research behind this and put this on a graph just to show you how different this is. And what's really interesting now is if you think about the answers you just gave about China being low context, China is actually at the other end of the spectrum. It's high context. So on your screen, the low context ones, you'll see the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, and some of those from Europe. Good communication, precise and simple. People like a bit of repetition, but only really if it clarifies communication. If you then go to the other side, high context, this is where communication is much more sophisticated. It's nuanced. There's layers to it. And it can be very much around having to read between the lines. It's about often what's not said. And often body language, intonation, phrases can really make a difference to what's said versus what is intended. And one of the classic examples is often when people give responses in Asia, in some countries, where the answer is yes to everything. But yes very much can be no, because yes is about saving face, or it's yes, but I'm going to have to go away and talk to others. And in the middle here, I love this phrase. They call these the Romance languages. So it's a little bit more fluid, but it's around how language can often be the basis of this. So if you think about how much you work using written communication and email when we're planning global events because of the challenges of time zones, etc., what I would say here is establish your relationships first and invest heavily in those, particularly in some parts of the world where communication is very different. And if you think you get something back that doesn't feel right, again, clarify, get on a call. And you may well find, as I have done over the years, that you end up having to take more site visits to get to really understand the situation. And this comes from one of my favorite books. It's called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It's available from Amazon and other booksellers and in multiple languages because it's seen as really critical for cultural diversity, particularly as it says here, getting things done across cultures. So question 8, some societies are more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, but which of these is the least comfortable? Brazil, Australia, Spain, or South Africa? So the poll is up there: Brazil, Australia, Spain, or South Africa. And Michaela, I'll leave for you to shut that when you think we've got enough and give us the results.
Seven people chose Brazil. 4 people chose Australia. 2 people chose Spain, and 1 person chose South Africa.
Great, thank you. And the answer is Brazil here. So Brazil doesn't like uncertainty and ambiguity. They want things to be clearer. That really contrasts with Australia, who can deal with uncertainty. It's just a way of life, and ambiguity. It's their norm. So imagine again where people are coming from and what information you're giving them and how clear you are, as well as how much context you provide. So the backstory to the decisions that are being made. And this is a map to show the diversity, and this is from another source. And what we'll be able to do after the webinar is share some of these resources with you, because hopefully you're going to be inspired to take a deeper dive into an area that I've really loved at getting to know. And this comes from something called Hofstede's dimensions. So Global Peace Index comes from the Vision for Humanity. So this talks about the Peace Index. It measures a range of factors, and number 1 would be the top spot. So out of these countries, which one ranks 131 out of 157 countries? USA, Vietnam, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Thanks, Michaela.
Eight people chose the USA. 3 people chose Vietnam. 3 people chose Egypt, and 1 person chose Saudi Arabia.
Great. So, you know, some really interesting insights here, I think. And you did pick the USA. So how does that contrast with the other ones on the list? Well, what I can tell you is the most peaceful country, number 1 slot, is Iceland. Vietnam is number 41. There's close areas around Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the USA. And I think this is a really interesting example of what peace means, and where people go looking for data. So I know, having organized events in the United Arab Emirates, when we were planning our event there, one of the community sectors was really unhappy about that and kept sending us data around, but look at safety, security, peace, etc. What they hadn't done was look at their own country. And we were able to reflect back actually better safety or same ratings on certain things. So this is the whole thing around people going looking for information, that they're trying to back up their point of view, but not pausing to reflect and challenge their own perspective.
Tracy, there's a question in the chat.
Yep.
Somebody would like to know which country was last on the Peace Index, which is 157.
Oh, good question. I don't have the index right in front of me, but I think we can follow up that. And what we can do is give you the link to the data so you can actually go and have a look at that. I'll have to remember that question for next time. So thank you. So according to the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex Association, ILGA, in how many countries is same-sex acts criminalized by law? 52, 74, 93 or 61? And the reason I've chosen this question is, if you think back right to the beginning when I showed you the most common DEI factors that come into play, it's something that is around protected characteristics in some countries, but also where people really value the freedoms, and where equality has advanced and isn't necessarily reflected in other parts of the world. So once we see this, I've got some interesting statistic and contrasting statistic here to show you. So if we can have the answers, Michaela, if we're ready.
3 people chose 52, 7 people chose 74, 2 people chose 93, and 1 person chose 61.
Okay, so some of these numbers are a little bit close together, so maybe I was a bit sneaky here, but the actual answer is 61. But what I want to do is show you the world map of where this data comes from. And I want you to just pause and look at that map and look at which parts of the world that this question actually focuses on. Lots of areas within Africa and the Middle East and Gulf region, some areas across into Asia, and obviously some of the small Caribbean islands as well. And I want you to hold that image in your mind. Now I'm going to show you a map of the world religions. And the area I want you to focus on again is the pink area, which represents Islam. The reason I think this is vitally important to look at is you cannot look at one dimension around diversity and equity and inclusion without looking at related factors. If you're making decisions and saying we're not going to go to certain countries because of their approach to LGBTIQ+ issues, you risk actually disadvantaging and a whole other sector of DEI considerations around religion. So again, just to go back, I think this is something that really stays, is that the interrelated dependencies between a particular dimension of cultural complexity and another. And I think this plays out when you're planning international events. And it's certainly something I have experience of. And again, it's because some countries are better known than others. But what is interesting in this whole field is how rapidly the world is changing. And there are those of us who still remember 50 years ago in our own countries when the world was very, very different and not as free as it is now. And we have newer countries coming along with rapid change. So 2 last questions to go through. Which country sees confrontation, love a bit of confrontation, as a positive? Is it India, Mexico, Israel, or China? Thanks, Michaela, when you're ready.
Two people chose India. Nobody chose Mexico. 7 people chose Israel, and 6 people chose China.
Great. So Israel does actually nudge it here as a country who thrives on confrontation and sees it as a positive, not something to shy away from. But what I'm going to show you now is, again, one of those graphs and the contrasts. So Israel, very happy with confrontation. France, Germany, similarly. What's interesting here is both the US and UK are in the middle. Maybe we can deal with it sometimes, but actually, you know, we'd rather avoid it if we can. So that's that sort of finding the peace, the middle ground. But there are other countries. And again, Japan is one of those that really avoids confrontation. So if you have got situations that you're trying to explore and surface, it really changes communication styles. And actually, confrontation doesn't happen in isolation from being emotionally expressive. And what I've got to show you here is emotionally expressive and confrontational, Israel compared to Japan down in the bottom right corner. But you can also see different situations. And this, again, is one of the things that's in the culture map. And for me, these are those light bulb moments when you suddenly think, why is something not working when you're planning in a particular country? And you start to unpack why you might end up with that belief, but also in a particular situation, and then to think about how do you change that. So the last question I have for you is, in which country are most people laid back about time? Huge issue, isn't it, when we're project planning, particularly around events? UK, Germany, India, and France are your options this time. Thanks, Michaela, when you're ready.
6 people chose India, and 9 people chose France.
Okay, UK and Germany didn't feature this time. So the answer is India. And I think for many of us that work in in our home countries, we work in multicultural environments now. We have people around us from all backgrounds, and we probably see some of these traits in some of our own colleagues. But also this gets amplified when we're actually in destinations and in countries. But it's all about relativity. So if I'm from the UK, for example, my colleagues in Germany are very structured about time. It's the classic German car maker sort of adverts that we may well have seen. Made on time, precision, etc. And they'll probably find us a little bit frustrating. But then I will be thinking, my colleagues in France and India, why can't they deliver on time? You know, we've got projects we're planning, I'm waiting on it. And France will be thinking, oh, the UK are too strict, just give us a bit more time. So it's where you sit in this spectrum relative to other people. And things inevitably get done. The problem is if it's not your way of working. And if you're thinking about your project plans, you lift them up, you want to go into a new destination, your approaches to communication and marketing, your approaches to negotiating, to logistics on site can be enormously stressful if things aren't going the way you are used to. So relativity, I think, here is critical. So hopefully what I've done with these 12 questions is give you some insights into some of the factors that really impact how we work internationally. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here just to talk about a few of those in a little bit more detail. So I think, you know, for me, this is a fascinating area to get into. It impacts everything that we do. And it starts by being really reflective ourselves around our privileges and our biases, the way in which we work, the roles we play, and to think about how accepting we are of differences and our readiness to be adaptable to that complexity when we're planning events. There is a wealth of information out there that will both challenge and support your assumptions. And you need to go looking for it. As event marketeers, as event planners, it can really make a difference. And ultimately, we're in the people business. So it's how you interact with people. Be reflective and be intentional. And that means really being ready to change your communication approach and make sure you're really listening and adapting that in different environments. This can play out in lots of location choices. But it's about making the right choices for you strategically as your organization, but being ready for some of the consequences that may come up, particularly around communication challenges, when people see the world different from you and different to your organization. And I think those are the key takeaways I would leave you with, as well as an encouragement to look at some of the resources that we've shared. So, Brian, I hope your community will find this really helpful to sort of look at it. And I'd be interested in how people got on with the quiz. The caveat I would say is I know when I've done this previously, if anybody gets 6, that's a great score because these are challenging questions, but really happy for any questions now that come up.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I think, it's very enlightening for us. I think all of us do some type of global events. And one of the key takeaways I hear is really listening, right? Listening to how other people communicate when we're working with global teams on planning, but also listening how attendees, either attendees that were coming to the United States, or if we're trying to drive attendance in another country, that behavior might be way different than we expect in the United States. So it's very important to look at these cultural differences as we're all global planners. I think traveling globally now is, way different than when I started in the industry, and we love it. I couple of notes before I mention anything. I just want, are there questions from the audience? I'm looking at the chat. I don't see.
I'm having a quick look. No.
I thought it was really interesting that 20% of women globally are government representatives. I would love to see that number grow. I think, obviously as a 51% of the population, there should be much more representation. So we would love to see that number grow as well. And I think also we're seeing that in corporate America as well. Like that number should increase in corporate America in executives as well. And I think there is a lot for us to do there.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting one, Brian, because the statistics for those countries that are doing better is often when there's been intentional action. So that means actually, reverse discrimination or, promoting advantage. But if you think about DEI, I often think one of the parts of that that's missing is the element of justice.
Right.
And that is, how do you get access to equality of opportunity in the first place? And I think, that's why you have to have intentional programs, because you have to go further upstream to look at the barriers that aren't enabling that to happen and think that's where you need to change, not just acknowledge where it's happening now, but actually get to the root causes. And it's only if you adjust the root causes will you see that come through and come through much more naturally.
Wonderful. The other note, communication styles, so different, whether it's written or whether you're in face-to-face meetings or meetings like this, like it's very important for us to understand how people are receiving the information that we're giving out.
Yeah, and I think, when you're working internationally and you're working across time zones, many of us rely really heavily on email communication.
Yeah.
And, if I think back to those statistics around low context and high context, how often do we might write, we've made this decision, next step's this, and somebody else is receiving it and thinking, well, I haven't been consulted. How do I know that's the right step?
Yeah.
Where's the trust? You haven't asked me for my opinion. Whereas you think, no, we've had that conversation or something. So, I think that is critical here. And the value of jumping on a call is, work across your time zones, make it happen and invest in those relationships.
Wonderful. Well, I know we're close to time here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Is very, very interesting. I think opening up the communication, listening to our partners is super important. Thank everyone on the line today for joining us. This was an amazing session. We will post this session and send it out to people so that they can share the knowledge that we learned today. Everyone that's online, thank you. We'll be looking for you to join us again on February 5th for some additional great information out there. So again, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in other SEMA events. Tracy, Stephanie, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.